When you go, you're probably going to leave behind some stuff, right? Maybe some money, maybe some jewelry, maybe some property, maybe some furniture, some treasured family items. That's great. But what other legacy are you going to leave to your loved ones? And how can you let them know after you're gone that they were treasured, more treasured than those things that you might actually leave behind? Hi, it's Margaret Maloney, and welcome to Season 3 of the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. When they were in their 70s, my parents began to have discussions with me about their death. Some of it was very practical discussion. For example, here's where to find the paperwork, and here's what we want. And at first, I was not open to those discussions. Didn't want to participate, sat there until they were done talking, changed the topic. But to their credit, they kept at it. And eventually, I was able and willing to participate in those discussions. And what a gift that was, because what they did was they helped me become as ready, or I guess I'll say as ready as I was going to be, to live a life without them. And this concept of being ready and creating legacy is exactly what Dr. Kimberly Harms discusses with us in today's episode about leaving a legacy of love. Welcome, everyone, to a special episode of the Death Dhamma podcast. And today we have Dr. Kimberly Harms, and she's the author of Are You Ready? How to Build a Legacy to Die For. And wow, talk about something that's so helpful, right? So it's helping us prepare for death and leave legacies. And I want to say, make things easier for the people that we leave behind, to be like a death prepper, which is very much in theme with so much of what we discuss together on this podcast. So Dr. Kimberly Harms, thank you so much for being here. And maybe you would like to add to that introduction.
Well, I think the addition might just be that I've been around the block in life, and so I've seen a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. Mm-hmm. I was a dentist in my former profession, and retired now, working on educating dentists in grief and managing grief. And I have I have 2 surviving children and 6 grandchildren, which is why I wrote the book as a legacy.
Okay. And that was going to be the first thing I was going to say. It's like, why? Why this book? Why this book now?
Well, I'm 67. So when you get to be my age, you have a lot of losses. Either you die early, right, with few losses, or if you live a long time, you're going to see everybody around you passing away. It's part of life. Death is part of life. And but the biggest losses in my life were my mother, who died when I was 17 from suicide. Okay. My son, who died at 19 from suicide.
Ouch.
And my husband, who died 3 years ago, from really a broken heart after my son died. So those deaths certainly put me in the grief pit, which I'm sure you talked a lot about. I've spent a lot of time down there. I bought curtains and there's no windows. I mean, I was down there permanently in my head for a number of years, and realized the importance of fighting your way out.
Wow, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's such a great phrase. I bought curtains for no windows. And I can look back and see exactly what you mean. And anyway, please continue.
No, thank you. That's such an important part of grief. And we don't like to talk about that place, but it's not a good place to be. And so you got to fight your way, fight to get out. But the reason I wrote the book, the real trigger, was when my husband died. Mm-hmm. My grandchildren were so affected by the loss of their pop, and the oldest ones at that time, I think, were 7. Mm-hmm. I looked at them I thought, oh my goodness, we don't think about what can we do for our survivors to make it, they're going to grieve, they'll spend
Right.
some time in the pit, but what can we do to help them survive as healthily as we can? What can we do so that when I go, especially when I go,
Mhm.
I want to show my children how much I love them by doing everything I can to make my death easier and to remind them I'm going to be there.
That is so thoughtful. It is so thoughtful. And I will just interject. I've seen both sides of this. My parents worked to make it as, you know, painless, not that it was painless, but, to ease the way as much as possible for me when they were going to go. Once they got to a certain point in life, they always talked about what to do when they're gone. And at first I wasn't open to the conversation, but eventually I was, because they kept having it. And so good for them. And they were really ready. And then I've seen the other side of somebody who maybe isn't ready to face the idea of their own death. And so because of that, everyone just has to deal with the fallout. And I do think that that makes it so much worse,
And
So,
it's natural to not want to face your own death. I mean, if we don't think about it, we don't plan, especially in our culture, we live in this death denying culture where
mhm.
we do everything we can. If only we work out a certain way, and if only we do this and we eat right and we do these things, which are all great, because then you can expand the time to leave your legacy. So that's good. But at some point, we're gonna all pass away, and we have to
Yes.
manage that. We have to understand that and help our survivors manage that.
Yes, it only works one way, and it's out we go eventually, no matter what we do, no matter what we do. You use a phrase, emotional life insurance. Could you tell us more about what that means?
Yes, we all know the value of providing life insurance for financial issues. We provide financial life insurance for our kids so that when we go, there'll be some financial cushion for them when we pass away. But we don't spend time thinking about their emotional health and
Hmm.
providing emotional life insurance for them. So that when in teaching them, talking to them, your parents, I'm like, they get an A plus for especially for their generation because they didn't just talk to you once. They kind of kept, because you kind of have to stay at it. We're not really used to having those discussions in our culture yet, but they talked to you several times and they tried to make it easier. So they were really providing some emotional life insurance for you, even though you didn't know you needed it at the time. But they were trying to make things easier for you. And I think if we think about it in those terms, financially they need help, emotionally they need help. What can we do to provide emotional help for them now? And part
Hmm.
of that, it's part of that in the book. I have the last third of the book is a death preppers workbook that has everything listed and kind of a to do, what things you can do. One thing I'm doing is I'm writing letters for my children and grandchildren to be delivered after I die, telling them how much I love them, how grateful I am, for them. And again, providing that emotional tie-in that, look, I want you to be happy that I lived and I was here and I could help you when I could, and
Hmm.
understand that when I go, I'm going to be gone. But look at the good, look at the happiness, look at the happy times. And that's really hard, having
Hmm.
lost my three, the three that I lost, it took forever, really, it seems to me, to be able to look back at them, at their lives and say, oh, how rich my life was because they were there. How rich my life was
Yeah.
because they were there. And so if we can help them to do that, that's emotionally providing them some support for after we go.
And then those letters are something that they can keep. And when they're having a day when they miss you, they can keep bringing out the letter and reading it, and
Mhm.
read it to their grandchildren, and maybe even it gets passed down through the family. That's a really useful kind of thing. Now, you also talk about the stages of grief versus the tasks of mourning, and I was curious about what you meant there.
Well, when my son died, after
Hmm.
my son died, I also, a year after he died, I developed some issues with my hand, and I'm a dentist, and the drilling fingers. I mean, you need your hand to practice, right? So, in one
Hmm.
day, I was told by the doctors at Mayo Clinic, I'm done. I can no longer practice dentistry. Now, my husband was sick, so that was a difficult time, but I had some time on my hands. What am I going to do, right?
Right.
So I became a grief counselor because we dentists, like, we don't
Oh.
we don't ask for help very well. That's one of the things I'm still working on. And so I thought, well, I'll just become a grief counselor and then I'll figure all this out, right? So anyway, I hadn't dealt with my own grief enough to really be an effective grief counselor, although I think I did help a few people. But the biggest thing I learned during that time as I was studying this, the biggest thing I learned that just hit me were the tasks of mourning. We're all familiar with the stages of grief, and they were Kubler-Ross had written about that, and it was kind of involves denial and bargaining and anger, and the last stage is acceptance. So last stage is acceptance, and that was written for people as they were dying, people that were going to die. So it was basically written for that. Interestingly, the tasks of mourning start with acceptance. So when you lose someone, when you lose a loved one, the first thing you have to do is accept their death. That might seem pretty simple, but actually it's kind of hard sometimes to do that.
Right.
You have to accept their death. So you start with acceptance, and then you have to kind of, once you have that acceptance, then you have to work through the grief. You have to do the grief work. That's when you're down in the pit. That's a work of scraping and crawling to get yourself out of that pit, to resist the urge to buy the curtain, to get out of that pit. That's the dealing with the grief. So you have to manage the pain. There's pain. Right? Then you have to adjust. The third step is to adjust to the new world. When you lose a husband, all of a sudden I'm alone. I'm in a new world. I wake up in the morning. I got married at 19. I was married to my husband for 44 years. For the first time, I wake up and there's nobody there. Nobody knows when I go to the store. If I go away and come back, nobody knows where I am. You have to face a new reality, a different reality. You lose your identity as a wife, as a mother, especially with my son. So you have to adapt to those new surroundings. You have to adapt to your new world without this person in it. And then the final stage is when you kind of bring it all together and you keep that person. And I think I've kind of gotten there now with my husband, my son, my mother. I have them in a place now where I can think about them, and there's a few tears, but there's also a lot of joy about the wonderful times they're there. So you kind of put them in a place in your heart. They're still there. You don't push them off. They're still there. They're part of your life. But you can look at your life without that shroud of grief. You're looking through that shroud all the time when you're grieving. The shroud of grief is removed. You can live totally in the moment. I've got 6 grandchildren. I can live totally in the moment for those 6 grandchildren because I have placed those 3 in a place in my heart where they're there. I remember. I talk about them. We talk about them all the time. But it doesn't affect my day-to-day life. I can live without them, and that's what I want my children to be able to get to, the place I want them to be able to get to as quickly as possible when I'm gone.
That makes a lot of sense as you're speaking. I'm thinking of, parts of my own journey, and, it's been 9 years for me maybe 7 years, I guess, since the last of my big losses. And sometimes I tear up, but mostly I think of it as like, I bring my people along with me. And, there's things I know I do because they were in my life. And sometimes I share stories about them. It depends on the audience. And, I maybe don't do it as often as I used to. But yeah, I just know there are things I do because they were part of my life. And I do very much remember that, going through that idea of like, what is my life now? What does my life look like now? What am I supposed to do? Definitely having that, like, well, now what? That feeling of like, well, now what am I supposed to do? And step by step, I guess you figure it out, huh?
Yeah.
So what are some of these important legacies? So for example, you've got these letters. And what are some other important legacies that we can leave behind for others to help ease their journey?
Well, the most important one, of course, is, and this is a pretty universal legacy, and that's just love. If people know that they're loved and they're accepted, they need to know that. We need to be open about that. We need to talk about that. The last thing, for instance, I said to my son, our family, before we hang up on the phone, we say we love you. So the last thing my son heard from all of us was we love him before he died. My husband knew that we all loved him before he died. That's the biggest one you can pass on. I do a lot of work in Rwanda. We have memorial libraries there. And I was working with a group of widows from the genocide in Rwanda. And they're so wise when it comes to grief and understanding. They're just so wise. They were mentioned quite a bit in my book. And they were always in nothing, but they talked about when I brought up the fact that, well, love is the best. Money's not the legacy. The love is
Right.
the legacy. And they could all just perk up and say, "Oh yes, I can do that." So anybody can leave love. Education is a good one. Acceptance, grief, laughter, learning how to laugh at yourself. I mean, if we could teach people how to laugh at themselves, what a great legacy that is. Hard work. All of these things are wonderful legacies. And
Mhm.
then those are the legacies we leave as we're living. And the legacies that we can leave that we work hard at to prepare for our deaths can be
Mhm.
the letters of, and I have in the book, I actually have little templates so that people that really don't like to write, just fill in the blanks and send it out if you have to. Just something very easy. Apologize to people, forgive people. Forgiveness is a huge, important thing for you and for them. Even if they don't accept your forgiveness, if you can free your heart, you prepare yourself as well. And as an example, um, and getting everything ready so that when you go, all of your passwords are in order, all of your um, you can even write your funeral if you like. You can.
Mhm.
I think picking out a nice obituary picture is a good one too, because you never know what the kids are going to pick out. So I have they would pick out like a nice one with my makeup all put on and everything. And my obituary picture that I want is I had an opportunity for just a brief minute, and we got a picture where I was
Uh-huh.
on a horse with the big eagle. That's my obituary picture, and I don't
Okay.
look horrible, but that's my obituary picture. So I think some things like that you can do just to show them that when you pass away, you're showing them, I love you. I'm preparing you. This is a normal part of life. We're preparing for this, and I'm going to make it as easy as possible when I go. Those are
That,
all legacies.
that makes a lot of sense. So, um, some of the ways that, because I told you, I think my parents did such a good job. Okay,
Mm.
so to support what you're saying, my father one day, and this was just, he was getting older, so statistically we knew what was coming, but he wasn't sick yet. He eventually died from lung cancer. But at this point, I remember during this discussion, it was just, we were just on the phone. And my dad just all of a sudden started telling me, that he cared about me, that he was always proud of me. There was nothing that he was ever upset or he was, upset with me about anymore. Kind of all that, like just such a lovely, freeing discussion. It was really terrific. And then, you talk about the obituary thing. My parents both had their obituaries written. They had their pictures. They had their pictures selected. I had asked them once upon a time to create, there's these books. If we don't use your template, there's these books that I don't know if they're still for sale. They're called The Story of a
Sure.
Lifetime.
Yes.
And it asks some basic questions so that after somebody's gone, there's things you're going to forget about, but you can look it up, and they both did that. And then, and I joke and say, this is how I realized that my mom was a control freak. Um, she left instructions for practically every detail of her funeral, down to the have my friend Mary bring her cheesecake to the church hall. I'm not kidding you. Have this person do the readings, have this person sing. And that's when I was like, hey mom, you are kind of a control freak. Like it never really dawned on me during our life together. But that was so helpful because it turned out that I had, two people die within 5 days of each other. And my mom was one of them. So thank goodness that I had all this help. Like I never had to wonder, am I doing what she wanted? I never had to wonder. And that was a huge gift.
Yes.
So yeah, I
They're,
see. I see what you're.
they're showing you how much they loved you.
Yes, that just doing the best they could to make it as easy as possible. Definitely. Now, we talk about, letters and letting people know we care about them. But what if we're not really in touch with someone? What if there's been a division in the family? How do we take care of leaving a legacy to someone that we're not really in touch with?
Well, you can't control somebody else's behavior, and I think we have to remember that sometimes.
Hmm.
What you can do is you can forgive, and
Okay.
you can I would write them letters anyway, and
Ah.
have it in your legacy folder, or your legacy. I have a binder with page protectors, and everything's in there, so it's you can
Hmm.
look through it, not lose things. Have letters to them in your page protectors. When you go to Rwanda, one of the things I've learned about forgiveness, and when my son died, I was so distraught. I thought, well, the people that would know about losing families is Rwanda. They had that horrible genocide
Yes.
uh, years ago, and it was their neighbors, were killing them. So now they not only have to live with these, the people, the killers. How do they manage that? And what they did was they decided that they had to change things, or
Mm-hmm.
their kids would end up in the same boat. So they had to forgive the unforgivable. And so I learned so much from them in that forgiveness, because what I learned from them is it's like a butterfly, it's like you're like a caterpillar when you're angry and you have resentment, and
Mm-hmm.
forgiving kind of metamorphoses you into a butterfly. You're free. Now, even if the person doesn't accept your forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
that's them, because that does happen a lot.
Oh,
But
sure.
you forgiving is freeing them, is freeing you, also frees them. But you
Mm-hmm.
can still write letters to them.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I kind of recommend that we're doing right now, which makes it so easy, is with our phones, we can just hold our phone up and tape record ourselves answering all these questions about, where we were born, what happened, where, if say it's a child that you haven't talked to for a long time, say, I love you so much, I just want you to know that. And this is some of your history, and I want you to be aware of your history. Give them that gift of your life, even if they don't, they might not even accept it, they might not even take it, but you've done that, you've given that to them, and it's freed you up. And hopefully when you do pass on, it may free them up as well. They have to accept it, but it may free them up as well.
I think that's really important. There's something I'm thinking about as you're saying that, and it goes like this: tips for how do I write a letter to someone who's estranged without them feeling like I'm just trying to get the last word in because I died first and I gave them the letter.
Right. Well, you can't mention the conflict.
Okay.
That's the whole thing. You can't go back and relive the conflict, kind of like, and now I'm dead, so that's it. That's a story.
Yeah, because every once in a while you hear things like that, or you read obituaries that go viral, and they're kind of funny, but they're kind of not, because they're kind of like, and I'm leaving nothing to any of you because you're all jerks to me, neener.
And when you forgive, you don't have to say, I forgive you for what you did. You just have to, because sometimes it's like, well, I didn't do anything, So when you're writing that letter, it's important not to mention whatever the conflict was. Just take the big picture. I'm your mother. I will love you. This is some of your history. I want you to be aware of your history. And I just hope you have a wonderful, wonderful life. I love you so much. And I'm proud of you. Those types of things. Don't even mention the history, because that's not important, right? The conflict really isn't important. What's important is knowing that you're loved, and then you've given your love, and you've done everything you can then. You've done everything you can, so then you're free from that burden, and hopefully that may free them up as well. So you do it with that manner, and yes, thank you for reminding me of that. But yeah, you do not mention the conflict, because
Right.
And let me publish this for the world to see, so that everybody knows I was right and you were wrong. That's not
You
an
stole my
apology.
toy when we were
That's
5,
right.
and I'm still mad at you. Oh no.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up, because no, that would be terrible.
Yeah, because it's, there's difficult things. Now, you've mentioned Rwanda a couple of times, and it occurs to me that you have some experience with talking to people about death in different cultures.
Yes. One of my favorite things that I like to see my children doing right now is that movie Coco that came out years ago from Disney.
I love that movie. I love that movie.
Love it. The Dia de la Muerta. Oh my goodness, that came out, around a little before my husband died. And in Kansas City, I had 3 children, grandchildren, Kansas City, 3 up here. Both places they talk about Dia de la Muerta in their classes, which we never did. I didn't know anything about that when I was growing up. And so they actually have a little friend day where they put pictures of my son, their Uncle Eric and their pop and the people that they, that have passed away. And so they're managing it. I think that system where it's recognized, and you still talk about the people that have passed away, is so much more helpful than the culture of denying that it happened, and plugging it away, not talking about the people. It gives you a chance to really kind of celebrate your ancestors, celebrate, and it also provides children with the understanding that we are all going to die. Because I don't know if I ever talked about death in school or as I was growing up with anybody. When I was a kid, we just didn't talk about death. It was like it just never happened unless some horrible thing had to occur that would kill you, without the understanding that, well, you're going to die at some point anyway. We die different ways, but it's going to happen anyway. We kind of felt like we could somehow avoid it. And that type of a cultural celebration, they let kids and adults and everyone, the entire family, celebrate their ancestors and the people that have died.
Yes, I love that tradition too. And I do think that, I did some work a few years back of just interviewing different Buddhist teachers about how they first learned about death. And so from a Western perspective, it's often with pets. When we're kids, it's pets. But for maybe people who didn't have pets as kids, it might be a grandparent. And then sometimes, though, it's, at a shockingly young age, as you encountered, it's a parent. And so so a lot of these people were very honest about saying that there wasn't a lot of preparation, and how that impacted their lives as they moved forward, how they impacted their lives moving forward with not having that readiness. So yeah, to have something as joyful as the celebration of the Day of the Dead. I love that too. I'm sitting here looking at 2 little skeleton figurines that are on my desk, and I keep them up year round, so definitely. So what do you think is the most, this is hard to choose, I feel like, but what could be the most important legacies?
Well, the most important to me is love. I mean, because everybody
Mhm.
can do that. Everybody, and that's a universal legacy. I think resilience is something that I'm really trying to help my children, my grandchildren, especially right now. Resilience, being able to look at themselves and laugh at themselves, not to
Mhm.
take themselves too seriously, to learn that you make mistakes and failures are part of life. You make a mistake, you don't have to go way down into the tubes. If you make one, you make a mistake, you correct it, you learn
Mhm.
from it, you move on, and failure is part of life. All those lessons that we learn, how to work hard, the value of hard work, all those are lessons that are important to pass down to our children, for them to see us, as an example of those legacies.
I think that's true. I think of some of my friends who have gone through death and loss of parents, and so in so many ways, I'm thinking of a particular friend. We talk together often about our mothers, because I think our mothers died around the same time, and that's probably part of what started our friendship. Uh, is the How would my mom have handled this? And sometimes it's I don't want to handle it like my mom would have handled it, but sometimes it is we are referring back to the strength that these women had and resilience. Absolutely. My friend will say, well, my mom would have said, or my mom would have done this, and so it's nice when we can have that, our ancestors' example and voice in our ears, absolutely. Now, despite everything you and I are talking about and the value that we've seen because of what we've lived and what we've seen in the people around us, there are going to be some families who are just not going to prepare for a loved one's death. And so, what kind of challenges do you anticipate in that kind of situation?
Well, I think all of us are probably know of people whose families have been torn apart, because there was no will, there was no
Mm-hmm.
preparation. You just had to kind of figure it all out, and the person that was closest, to the home, maybe had to do a lot more work than someone that may have lived on the other part of the country, or things were not explained, and there were surprises. So we've seen families absolutely just torn apart, so they're not talking to each other. And like, that would be the worst tragedy for me. One of my legacies, I have 2 daughters, and they
Mm-hmm.
love each other, and I tell them, that's my biggest legacy, is that your love for each other, and you take care of each other. That's one of them. One of the things, I just encountered a family just recently who, the mother was dying.
Mm-hmm.
She had a terminal illness. They were told it was terminal, but the family was still kind of hoping for a miracle. They were just hoping it was not going to go. And so
Right.
sometimes, even in those families, in the last days, they don't want to deal with some things that could be easily taken care of, while that person was alive,
Yeah.
because they don't want that person to think that they think they might die. I mean, they don't, they somehow think that by admitting that death is possible, it's a betrayal. I can understand. I mean, when you go into that stage, you're so full of grief, which is why it's important to do this before you're sick, before you're sick and nobody has to deal with that. So what
Mm-hmm.
happened was with them is that she had a lot of property that was in her name that
Mm-hmm.
could very easily have been transferred and adjusted before she passed away, but because they didn't do it, It's
Oh,
taken me months and probably a year or so to get all of that legal stuff straightened out. And both my daughters are attorneys, but so this would be good for them because the attorneys then get an awful lot of that inheritance. You know, um,
oh, I
you
didn't
know,
think about that.
yes, yes, that's what. And my daughter works with the state. She works for dentists, and that's what she says. She said one of her biggest things is get this taken care of now, because the amount that you pay now to get these things drawn up is a small fraction of what you will have to pay to get it worked out
Mhm.
after the death. When you've got competing, then you have people that may be competing, and this one's going to sue that one, and that one's going to sue that one, and there might be a gigantic inheritance, and the only people that get any money are their lawyers working on it by the time it's all done. So think about it that way, that really it makes a lot more sense to take care of these things, even if there's a little investment on the front side, that can
Mhm.
be a huge problem on the downside. And of course, the worst part is not even the money that's lost. The worst part are the relationships that are destroyed when people kind of fight each other over these things.
Well, it's true. I often say that death makes people stupid. And I don't mean to be rude. I know that's not a very nice way of saying it, but I guess what I'm referring to is so often when someone dies and people are trying to process their emotions, it can bring out just, the worst in some of them. And that may happen anyway, but if you've eased the way, that doesn't have to happen. But I remember, just a couple of different stories, like one of my friends saying how after her mother died, somebody coming to the house and taking something off the wall and saying, well, I'm taking this because I gave it to her. And it's not that it wasn't okay for the person to have it. It was just the resentful way in which they did it. And, it's just it can just be so difficult. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is it's a type of haunting. If you are for years dealing with the legal aspects, and as you know, having gone through death with family members, like there's this whole business of death, the steps you need to take to wrap things up. And I mean, imagine that stretching out for so long, then I think you're never really free. I think it holds you back in a place in your grief journey because you're still having to take care of mom or dad's property and business. I don't know.
Yes.
What do you think?
I love that word haunting because it really is kind of a haunting. They
Yeah,
just, and that would be, for me, that would be the worst thing. If if you have a family that you love, you don't want them arguing, and you don't want any bitterness between them because you just didn't take care of the job you should have done because you were kind of, and the reason we do it, the reason we don't do it is that we kind of are in denial. We don't like to think about death. So the first step is to just accept and take a look at death. We're going to die, not to be
right.
afraid of it, to know it's going to happen,
Mhm.
and to just take a good solid look at and prepare for it, just like you would we're graduating from life. When you graduate from life, you want to graduate well, so get all your stuff ready so that when you graduate, everything's all set. And I
I
think
like
that's
that. I want to be at the top of my class.
top of your class. I want to be there too. Your parents were, really, when you think
Yeah,
about
they
what
did a
they
good
did at
job.
the time they did it. Yeah.
Yeah, they really did. And I always admire them because I will say early on in our lives altogether, we weren't a particularly open family. We weren't a particularly talk about difficult things kind of family. And I guess somewhere along the way we grew, clearly. And, again, they did such a good job. And even like as they got older and they had different illnesses in the past, that would have been like we were all very private and stoic about these kinds of things. But something about, I don't know what happened, but as they aged, they would tell me, like one day my mom told me, she's like, I fell down in the living room the other day. Or, your father has vertigo and passed out in church. And, I think it was maybe their little way of just keeping me informed, I guess, so that if these were things that were going to lead to a big thing, I wouldn't be like, well, why didn't And so they did. They really did a good job. Definitely, definitely. Okay, but so for those who are having a hard time with this, what questions can we use to help get the conversation about death going?
Well, this is a great one. First of all, I think we need, to talk about death itself, talk about the people that have passed, to make it a comfortable conversation.
Mhm.
And then what I recommend is when a holiday comes up and everyone's together, like a Mother's Day. Mother's and Father's Days are really good because then it's like, okay, this is your Mother's Day gift to me. I want you all to meet and we're going to talk about some things because it's important to have there are some samples you can get online. It's called Start a Conversation that will kind of give you some triggers to how to do this. But you can make it a family event because you want to be able to talk about it with everybody there, because then they know that that my wishes are this, my wishes are that. This is especially near the end of life. My husband was great in that we had a healthcare directive. So he decided to be in hospice, and I have so much respect for the hospice people. And he did not want to be in a hospital, and he gave that living will. We talked about it. I knew what his wishes were, and so nobody questioned what we did. He died at home. He did not want to go to the hospital. That's important for people to know, because you could have a brother and a sister that one says, well, mom wants to stay home, and the brother says, no, 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 we can't stay at home. Go to the hospital, get everything done because that's what I want.
Right.
The children can disagree, and if the parent hasn't sat and talked with both of them in the room, you're gonna lead to maybe some disagreements, and also writing it down. But having a discussion where they can see the mother describing or father describing what they want, so everybody knows, and then have it written down as well. That's so critically important to do. I have a really fun kind of a situation that happened in my house, and I'm trying to work with my grandchildren. And I had my little 7-year-old Heidi looked up at me the other day. She was at the table and she goes, Nana. And I said, yeah, Heidi. She goes, well, if what happens to Pop happens to you. And I said, well, what do you mean, Heidi? Because if I died? She goes, oh, yeah, Nana, if you died. I said, well, what, you have a question? She goes, yeah. Can we still go to Disney World? And I thought, oh my gosh, I've done it with Heidi. I have one success story. She knows. And I said, yes, yes, I want you to have a ball. I want you to have fun. When I die, I want you to just have as much fun as possible. So she kind of got it. So we can talk about death. And it was just a great experience, because I've been kind of working on the little ones. But I think even with the little ones, I have one daughter that's more likely to talk about it, another daughter that's a little hesitant. So I work with both of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. I love that. Can we still go to Disney World? But that could be the title of your next book.
Yeah.
Can we still go? I don't know if we're allowed to use that. Because I love that she's thinking that way, because what she's thinking about is like, after you die, I'm going to be sad, but can I still also live and be happy? And we both know that, yes, you can, right? We just we're going to live with our grief, and we're going to have joy also.
Right. And
our days are combinations of both these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just beautiful. I love that. You've been sharing with us so generously. And before I let you go, I just want to check in and see, what is there that you would like to tell us that maybe you haven't had a chance to share yet? Is there something that, I haven't asked that you're like, I wish Margaret would ask me this question?
I think that not that I can think of, except that just there's so many easy things you can do right now. Especially with your camera, with the camera on your phone. I have a list of questions in the book, but there are lots of books out there. There's so many resources out there. Look on the internet. There are wonderful things on YouTube. Oh my goodness. If you take a look at some of the discussions of life after death, which is just crazy, fascinating on YouTube. Take a look, start researching death if you're afraid of it. And if you have a chance, just get your phone and go over your life history. Tell your kids what you think you want them to know, and record it on your phone and then send it to them. It's such an easy thing to do. You could do it in 10, 20 minutes. My daughter did this for my husband. When my husband was sick, she videotaped him on the phone, asked him a bunch of questions. Then after he passed away, she put it all in a book and with pictures and so on. And it is such a treasure for us that we have of him. So think about little things you could do now to make sure your kids are emotionally healthy after you pass away.
That is beautiful. And any other, when I say final thoughts, I mean for this discussion, any other final thoughts for us?
Well, I guess just the hardest thing to overcome is we kind of feel paralyzed, at least in my generation. I'm a baby boomer. We kind of feel paralyzed. We cling to our stuff. We talked a little bit before the show started airing about the need to get rid of all your stuff so that your kids don't have to do it. We need to sit down, take a look at our lives, and try to become detached from the things that we have that we have an emotional attachment to that our kids might not. And just kind of come to terms with all of that, and just give your kids as much information as you can to prepare them for the time when you go. And so that when you're and do it before you get sick, get it all ready before you get sick, so that when you do, you can enjoy the time you have left, because it's going to happen to all of us. Some of us will go quickly, but some of us will have some time. And if you have a diagnosis that looks like it's terminal, or you're in hospice and you know that there's a limited time left, it would be great if you had all of this stuff done beforehand.
That's a great idea, because whatever we have left, we want it to be as easeful and joyful as possible. Definitely. Yes. Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing today. I know this is going to be really helpful for everyone. And, we are as the Death Dhamma podcast, we are trying to be a death ready group, and this is very helpful. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for asking me. It's been a real privilege to be here.
I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma Podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmaloney.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.